It is said that the Russian language contains no equivalent of the English word privacy. That's because the whole idea of privacy is not an important one, that the Russians don't put such an emphasis on it as we do. People from the English-speaking world like to have lots of elbow room in their lives. To Russians, that's less important, at least less psychological elbow room. They don't mind being crammed into a small apartment with a bunch of other people. It doesn't have the same negative connotation that it has with us. By the same token, English has no word for the Russian word sobornost, which is usually mistranslated as togetherness, but it means more than that. It means almost merging your identity with other people or even other things. It could be your family, it could be with just Mother Russia. In the Philippines, there are 120 languages and dialects spoken. In none of them is there equivalent of the English word depression or anxiety or even boredom. It's not that these things don't exist there, but they're considered things that are so downplayed, so uninteresting to a Filipino, that they haven't even developed the lexicon to talk about them effectively, or at least in the same clinical way as we have. Of all the people on Earth, the Filipinos have been found by, I guess it's the World Health Organization or something like that, to be the world's happiest people. So the language has never really evolved a need to describe what it is to be depressed or feel anxious or whatever. So languages are very specific from one culture to the next in terms of the way people think, see the world, see themselves, see their interactions with their fellow human beings. So be careful when you think that you can really understand another culture, even if you've learned their language, because I would say that you'd have to pretty much think in that language. I speak 2 languages, and I can usually think in French. It's usually not that tough. But that was the hardest thing to do, was to put together French thoughts, as it were, because the French thought process is different from the English one. Speak to anyone who speaks another language, their first language is not English. They'll tell you the same thing. It's much more complicated than just going from learning another language. You have to learn how to organize your thoughts in a completely different way, because words are just attempts at translating thoughts into a communicable sound. So, you say the word prophet. Muslims believe that Muhammad was a prophet. I would say no, they don't believe that. Because that is an English phrase. It's also a modern English phrase. And it's full of meanings that you and I are putting into it that would never occur to a Muslim to put into it. And there are meanings that we would put into that word, or that they would put into that word, that we wouldn't understand either. So what does that mean, that somebody is a prophet? Well, they believe in prophecy. Not necessarily. It just means that they believe that this person is a certain type of human being that can be identified with a word. It doesn't mean that they believe in prophecy, because again, prophecy comes from the English word prophet, and again, the Quran is not written in English. It's written in Arabic. It's written in old Arabic, a poetic and flowery Arabic. So you've got to understand that the whole thing is not approached from the same way as we would approach the Quran. We reach for our English copy, leaf through it, go to the index, find out about this, that, and the other. It says this here, as though we're reading a technical manual. Muslims never approach the Quran that way. I think that the translation of Quran is that which is recited. So it's much better if it is read out loud. And if you've ever seen it being read out loud, it's read in a very oratorical manner, reverential, poetic way, with great emphasis on each syllable. It's often sung. So you've got to take all of that into consideration when you're looking into the Quran. there's so much more to it than just the words written into it. And again, Arabs in particular, but I think most Muslims, see the world through what we would almost call a poetic matrix. Life is mixed with poetry in the minds of most Arabs. The equivalent to that in the Western world, I would say, or in the Western Hemisphere, would be the Latin Americans. They kind of think along the same lines. They tend to see life as sort of a much more of a morality play, more of a an epic thing. We tend to see it as a clinical thing. So be careful when you approach the Quran for instruction on what Muslims think. That's almost a mistake from the get-go to reach for your English translation of the Quran and start leafing through it. There's so much more to it than just the words. And even the words themselves are often not translatable at all. The phrases, the intonation. There's only one reason why anyone writes something in a poetic style and chants it or sings it in a musical sort of way. There's a lot more meaning to the words than just the meaning of the words. You have to understand what the Quran means to a Muslim before you can understand what the Quran actually means. Thank you.